Hello everybody, and welcome to another edition of Riding the Storm Out. I am Paul Blair, and this is Dan Fisher, who still has laryngitis. Thank you, Lord, you still answer prayer. And we are bringing you another edition of Riding the Storm Out. Of course, we are pastors. We work together, been friends for many years, and have worked together for the last several here at Fairview Baptist Church. And every week we bring you a biblical perspective on current cultural issues. And of course, the thing that has swept the world over the last couple of years has been this COVID pandemic. And we have had the blessing of becoming friends with a couple of local research scientists that have taken it upon themselves. And by the way, this research is not going to enhance their career. As a matter of fact, it's not going to help them. Very much cost them much of their career.
Most likely it will.
But they are compelled to be purveyors of truth. And they have researched and read all of the studies, not just the summaries, but they've gone through the studies from every country around the world to bring us a synopsis of what the truth really is. Because I don't know, I don't trust Dr. Fauci anymore.
I don't either. And see, that's the key. It's not the disease itself, it's that we're being lied to.
Yeah, and how we're dealing with the disease.
That's exactly right.
In fact, this week's episode is one that will reveal much information that may very well provoke a righteous indignation in you. So this week, enjoy this presentation from Dr. Amy Serrato and Dr. Eric Snyder.
With the release of the Omicron Delt variant, we just wanted to tell you that if you have
pineapple,
stay strong.
Pineapple, pineapple, pineapple.
For this Omicron, but the problem with natural immunity is that it's free. It doesn't make anyone any money. And so you need to know that throughout history, for centuries, herd immunity was equal to natural immunity plus some kind of, when we had vaccines, vaccinated immunity. When did natural immunity stop being important? Sometime in 2020. The World Health Organization took it off their definition and said, nope, immunity is only a function of vaccination immunity. How does that make sense? If you got the measles, you didn't need to get vaccinated, right? If you had the chicken pox, I haven't been vaccinated, but I haven't had the chicken pox again, so why was the definition of herd immunity changed to exclude natural immunity? The reason this is important is because when you vaccinate someone who has had COVID, you can cause adverse events at a higher rate than the general public. That we'll talk about in detail. So why doesn't natural immunity count in the US? Because a jab in each arm is way more lucrative, probably. This is another thing that bugs the heck out of me, because I'm all about the science.
Pineapple.
We have our barrier system, we have our innate immunity, we have our adaptive immunity. Our adaptive immunity comes out and it can remember anything that it's seen. It's very strong, and we should keep ourselves healthy, and our immune system will work. We wanted to show you this because of why we think the vaccines are so harmful. This is a study of seropositivity. So when you get a natural infection, your body generates natural antibodies, N. So we're going to call that N. This is the natural infection here. That's in red, okay? And this is the S, call it synthetic. So a synthetic antibody. So this is someone who was vaccinated and produces a bunch of this synthetic antibodies, and then they were exposed to a wild virus and got a natural infection. Well, the synthetic antibodies kept their bodies from producing any natural antibodies. So when you vaccinate children and you prime their bodies with synthetic vaccines, their bodies will never, for the rest of their life, produce enough natural antibodies against it. So they'll continue to get it and get it and get it and get it. Now, when you have the 50 non-structural and 4 structural proteins from the natural infection, you can see all the variants. Your body can see them, and they're going to throw them out. But when you have that vaccine, you have that one spike protein, it can't fight all of the variants. And so that's the difference between natural immunity and vaccinated immunity. Okay?
I think the literature on that stated that with the natural immunity, you had 23 variations of spike proteins that existed, and they're robust through your mucous membranes, as opposed to just the synthetic spike protein that's coming from taking a vaccination. So that is a huge difference.
And this study was from the United Kingdom. They have great data. United States has terrible data. The UK has some pretty good data, and we'll show you a lot more of that.
Pineapple.
We don't have time to go through all of the studies. There's 135 research studies that affirm naturally acquired immunity. The probable reinfection rates are somewhere between 0.00075% to 1%. Of those confirmed, you get much milder symptoms. And when I mean confirmed, I don't mean confirmed by a PCR test. I mean confirmed by a blood test.
Pineapple.
For longer lasting and stronger protection.
And I should probably point out, when we're talking about the PCR test in Oklahoma and the use of that at a cycle threshold of 37, if you went in, let's say, April of 2020 and you got a PCR test and you tested positive for COVID, there actually is a chance that you were not positive for COVID. And so now if you go back in and you test positive for COVID, and you might actually be positive for COVID, they say that that is a breakthrough infection.
I say vaccine failure. But
yeah, you've been reinfected. And so that is a very important point, because it hurts the natural immunity conversation, because what they're saying is we have a large portion of people that have tested positive twice, but the question was, okay, was the original test actually accurate? Because they didn't do the antigen testing to actually test if they have those antibodies present in the blood, which is an important point that Dr. Serrato was making too about the vaccine itself. If it has an adverse effect, so if you've had COVID already and you know, and that's confirmed through the antigen type testing, basically the idea of taking a vaccine after that point is in the emergency use authorization document that states you should have to have antigen testing before you even take the vaccine, because if you do, it can cause the antibody-dependent enhancement, which is problematic also. So I think we'll get into that in a little more detail. But
yeah, and so just so you have this information, why you should not vaccinate a person who has COVID, meaning if you're thinking about getting this for your child, or you're thinking about getting this for someone, get them a seroprevalence test. Get the antibody test first. Because you can, those with prior infection are associated with 4.4 times increased odds of clinically significant side effects. Adverse effects are more frequently reported in younger individuals, women, and among those who have previously had COVID. Vaccination is most strongly associated with an elevated risk of myocarditis. And the risk of this event and many other serious events was substantially increased after a previous SARS-CoV-2 infection. In individuals with a pre-existing immunity, the second vaccine dose not only fails to boost the humoral immunity, but determines a contraction of the spike-specific T-cell response. You have great immunity, and then you go give it the spike protein, and it cuts off your killer T-cells. So just, why would you do that? Don't do that. Yes. From all the data we'll show you, we think that. And the second vaccination dose appears to exert a detrimental effect in the overall magnitude of the spike-specific humoral response in COVID-recovered individuals. So if you have COVID, please think very hard about whether or not you want.
Pineapple.
Natural immunity is not recognized, but they didn't even collect any data. So you would assume that if the CDC was going to tell you and mandate that you had to get vaccinated, that they would prove to you that you had to. They didn't collect any data on natural immunity. So this FOIA request came out and says that we have no documents that show that someone who's had it is transmitting it or is getting infected again. Okay, and then, so we wanted to tell you that you can go to LabCorp in Oklahoma for $10 and get the seroprevalence test. You could go to this website, T-Detect, and get a T-Detect, you know if you got T cells. And we wanted to tell you that the FDA doesn't want you to do it. The FDA's told everybody, no, don't do it. Don't get antibody testing. Why? Because they don't want you to know. Because if you get antibody testing after you get injected, you don't have the same antibodies that a naturally immune person has.
they've actually done research studies on that. So Dr. J out in California, looking at the 2 counties that they were looking at death rates, they basically did seroprevalence studies on everybody there, and they found 50,000 people had already been exposed that they didn't document. And again, when I'm talking about the numerator and denominator, and you're adding 50,000 more COVID cases to calculate your infection fatality rate. That's an important data point. So if we were to test everybody in the United States right now of whether they're vaccinated or unvaccinated to see if they've been exposed to COVID-19, you might have millions upon millions of people that you then have to add to that equation, which then offsets the death infection fatality rate, which then maybe changes your risk analysis of going out in the public. And so that's an important point.
We thank you for joining us for this week's edition of Riding the Storm Out, and keep your prayer life going, because he still can't talk. Maybe it'll continue for a couple of more weeks. You never can
Is
tell.
this the only shirt you have?
That's the only one I wear anymore, as as Oklahoma State Cowboys or one of the dominant football programs in America. And I'm not ashamed to tell everybody that I am a cowboy. But until next time, ladies and gentlemen, we'll see you next week for our next edition of Riding the Storm Out.